Good morning, and welcome to the Financial Optimist. Now, I'm sure you've heard it said online before that American families aren't having children. Babies aren't being born. The next generation is going to be very small. Social Security is going to run out of money because no one's going to be paying taxes in 20 years. But if you ask around why people aren't having children, the number one answer I get from my friends and family is they just can't afford it. So that begs the question, just how expensive are families? Well, let's dive right into it. I want to make one thing clear. I'm not trying to encourage you from having children, nor am I trying to discourage you from having children. That decision is completely up to you, but I'm a firm believer in before you take on any responsibility, make sure you know what you're getting into. So before you have your first child, you should already have a plan in place on how you're going to afford that child. And today's presentation is only going to focus on the financial aspect of children. It won't focus on anything else, just the numbers. So let's dive right into that. So when it comes to young adults between 18 and 34, about half of them want to have children. The other half are undecided or don't want any. But when you look by gender, it's a pretty big difference. About 57% of young men want children, but only 45% of young women want children. And traditionally, men are considered the breadwinners. They have to earn the majority of the family's income. They pay for the expenses. And in the event of divorce, it's usually the man that has to pay child support. So if you're one of the men that wants to have children, you do have to financially prepare in advance for having children because they're expensive. So before your first child is even born, you should have already been spending years and years planning and preparing financially to make the baby's life affordable because you knew what you were getting into before you did it. So how much is the actual cost of having children? Well, in this news article, it shows the average cost of having a child in the United States is about $310,000 from age 0 to 17, and that's per child. And when you look at it by state, it can vary quite greatly. Places like Massachusetts are around $439,000, and places like Mississippi are less than half of that. So when you look at the numbers, you realize where you choose to have a family can make a huge difference. If you live in Massachusetts, maybe you only have 1 or 2 children, but you move to Mississippi, maybe you could have 3 or 4 children. You could potentially have twice as many children just by moving to a different state. So if you're someone wanting to have children, choosing where you live is a very, very important aspect to keep in mind when it comes to how expensive the families cost, because location is everything. Well, most everything. So now let's look at the next factor. How much does the average American earn in their entire lifetime? So the average man earns about 1.8 to 1.9 million, and the average woman earns about 1.1 million. So let's say you have a man and a woman, both working full-time jobs, raising a family. That's a combined household income of about $3 million over an entire lifetime. Okay, well, how much does the average American spend? Well, this news article, the average American spends $3.3 million over their entire lifetime. And so this explains why 2/3 of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. They spend approximately the same that they earn over their entire life. So let's go ahead and take a look at what exactly this money is going for. So here it shows you the breakdown by category. Housing is about $1.5 million because over your lifespan, you're going to be buying several houses, paying interest on it, or paying a lot of rent. That can add up to quite a lot of money. Cars, about $500,000 for cars. Now this number, obviously is taking an average. Some people get very expensive cars. Some people get very cheap cars. You don't have to spend this much. Like my house behind me here, I only spent $100,000 and it's a 3-bedroom house. I could raise a family here for a fraction of the cost. For cars, my first car was a $3,000 car. I drove that thing for 10 years and then I sold it for $2,000. So you can have affordable cars if you want to. And so when it comes to the lifestyle you choose to live, that also makes a huge impact in whether or not you can afford children. If you're someone that wants to live a very nice lifestyle, you're going to have to cut back on the number of children to afford the lifestyle. If you're someone that wants to have lots of children, then you're going to have to cut back on your lifestyle to afford the children. So that's a huge difference there, is what's more important, having children or having a better lifestyle? That's a question only you can answer for yourself. But let's look at this. He says children is about almost $500,000 for children, but mind you, the average family is about 1.6, 1.7 children per family, so if it's $300,000 per child, that would make about sense. Health insurance, $300,000. Kids cost a lot of money when it comes to the doctor. Now this here, retirement 401k, that's technically not an expense, that's an investment, because if you spend $200,000 on your 401k, you get the money back, and that's how, we're spending about $3.3 million over a lifetime, but only earning household income about $3 million, because you do have some 401k in there as well, which can help to cover some of the difference. And renovations puts at $200,000. Now they have $1.5 million for housing and about $0.2 million for renovation, so it's really about $1.7 million for housing when you factor that in. Now vacations, over a whole lifetime, $118,000. I mean, that's a big number, but over the course of 50, 60, 70, 80 years, the cost per vacation is a couple thousand per vacation. Now, furniture, $61,000. That's a lot of money on furniture. Of course, if you want to buy things used instead of new, you can always save money. Education, bachelor's degree, about $40,000 these days. You don't really have to go to college. A lot of places, offer jobs that pay about as much as college degree jobs do, but they don't require degrees. And so this is a completely optional thing. You don't have to go to college because it doesn't really pay the same as it used to anymore. Weddings. Well, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, you're not a princess, you're not a prince, you don't get some kind of a royalty wedding. A simple, ordinary wedding for just maybe, a couple hundred to a couple $1,000s, that's perfectly fine. If you're getting married, you don't have to put on some huge ceremony. Tens of thousands for a wedding, in my opinion, is way, way too much. You're nothing special, you're just an average middle-class American. Now, with that said, if you're looking to start a family, getting married before having children is very wise because you want to have a stable household to raise your family in. So if you want to have children, definitely finding a spouse first and then having a child would overall be the wisest course of action because you're more likely to stay together instead of getting your girlfriend pregnant. Maybe she leaves, maybe not. It's hard to say. But definitely getting married is very important. But of course, getting married comes with certain risks, which is a topic of a whole nother video. The risk of divorce, the risk of alimony, child support, that's a whole nother discussion right there. But let's just keep focused on the financial cost of the children for the purposes of this video. And so now that you look at the cost of where people's money is going over the whole entire lifetime, you realize, okay, if I want to afford children, I've got to make cuts where it matters most. Housing is by far the single biggest expense. And so many young people say things like, they'll never afford a house, they'll never retire. If you can find a way to solve the housing problem, then you can afford to have a family. Like, for example, I was living in one of the more expensive states in the U.S. a few years ago. I decided to move here to Florida, where real estate was much, much more affordable. And instead of moving to the big cities, I live in a small city. It's not exactly the middle of nowhere, but it's a smaller town. And that's how I'm able to find a 3-bedroom house for $100,000. Now, granted, it's an older house. I'm doing a little bit of work on it, fixing it up as I live here. But it's in overall decent shape. So if you want to find an affordable house in the U.S., it is possible. You just have to look at the small cities, avoid the big cities. You have to look at an older house. You have to be willing to put a little work into it. It is possible to find affordable real estate if you know where to look. And so you can take this massive expense, you can bring it down to a fraction of what everyone else is paying. If you can just save money on this one thing, even if your lifestyle was the exact same in every other area, you had the same cars, ate the same food, went the same vacations, but you got yourself a very affordable house, that one factor right there could potentially mean going from a family of 1 or 2 children to a family of 3 or 4 children, just by changing the type of house you get. And of course, this is in addition to where you choose to live, because certain locations have cheaper houses, other locations have more expensive houses. So where you choose to live, the type of house you choose to buy makes a huge difference in how many children you can afford if you choose to have them at all. So now this is some of the lifetime expenses. Let's go ahead and start talking about, some more solutions. If you want to have children, the simplest solution is to have children later in life, because the average age for marriage is about 30 years old here in the U.S. And it makes sense when we look at the numbers. People under 25 making $40,000 a year, but 25 to 35 about $60,000 a year. And 35 to 45 around $70,000 a year. So it makes sense. People in the 20s can't afford children, but by the time they get into the 30s and 40s, they can finally afford the family that they always wanted. Now they can have children. So if you're someone looking to have a family, if you're a young man under 25, keep in mind life's expensive. So my recommendation to you for those younger men is just keep on saving, keep on working hard. Do what I did, pay cash for a house long before ever having the first child. I don't have any children. I may have them one day. It depends. And so when I look at this, I realize if I'm a young person and I'm, especially if I'm a young man trying to save money, if I can pay cash for a house before having the first child, I have no mortgage. I save, $2,000-$3,000 a month right there. That one factor alone makes children much more affordable. So I continue to look at the math. I go, okay, a little older, you make more money. But you have to ask yourself, at what age are you too old for having children? So when I look at this here, I see, okay, the best age to get pregnant, this is from a woman's perspective, is the best age is typically, late teens to late 20s is what it says here in this article. And once you hit your 30s, your fertility begins to decline. So here, it shows, a lot of high-quality eggs for women who are under 35 years old, but after the age of 35, yes, getting pregnant at the advanced maternal age of 35 or older can increase your risk of pregnancy and make it harder to conceive. So typically for women, it's best for them to have their children be finished having all the children before 35. So let's say you want to have 4 children. You probably should start having children in your early 20s. That way by the time you get into your early 30s, you finish having your children before your fertility starts closing up. Because after 35, if you're waiting till that age to start having your first child, you're not having 10 children, you're having maybe 1. If you have your children in your 20s, you can have 3, 4, 5 children, whatever you want to have. So By this age, women are typically losing their fertility, but that's the age when they're starting to afford to have children. Is getting into, their 30s and 40s, that's when they can afford children, but they're getting biologically a bit too old to have a large family. And if we only have 1 or 2 children per family, that's not going to change the birth rates. We have to have more like 3 or 4 children per family for the birth rates to go back up. So the women have to have children in their 20s and early 30s. By the time they're in the mid-30s, they really should be finished having children by that point from a biological perspective. But they don't make enough money. So how do you solve that? That's simple. You go for an age gap marriage. Because if a man is a few years older, he's making better money, and the woman is a few years younger, still able to have children, that right there is a match made in heaven. Say a man in his 30s making great money, making, 60, 70,000 a year, maybe more. And a woman, say, is a little younger, in her 20s, maybe she's making a little less money, maybe 30, 40,000. That's a combined household income of about $100,000 for the household. So having an age gap marriage of, 5, 10, 15, or if you want to, 20 years would be a very logical way to help increase the birth rate because older men have more money and younger women have more fertility. So it's a very logical combination. So if you're looking to have children, that's the way to do it. If you're a young woman wanting to have children but you can't find a man to afford children, just look for a man a few years older. He can have some more money. And if you're a man wanting to afford children and you don't have any yet, that's fine. Just keep on saving, working hard. As you get older and you can afford children more easily, perhaps it becomes a better option later in life. Now, another consideration to make when it comes to having children is considering other countries. The United States is currently ranked as the 13th most expensive country on the planet. Many other countries out there are far more affordable. So look here at the search assistant, Eastern Europe. The expenses for raising a family average between $500 to $1,200 per month. And you look at this here, countries, you got places like, Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, low cost of living. So like renting a 2-bedroom apartment, 300 to 600 euros a month. Groceries, 200-300 euros a month. Utilities, 1 to 150. Childcare, schooling, 100 to 400 euros per month. So you look at a region like Eastern Europe, for example. Overall, it's much, much more affordable to raise a family. And so coming from the perspective of someone living in the U.S., I have to think, okay, other countries where it's cheaper, wages are less. Here in the U.S., life is expensive, but wages are quite high. So if you can save up a lot of money here in the U.S., then maybe one day move to a smaller country where life is more affordable. You can use the money you earned in the U.S. to then help you afford a family on a much smaller budget in a smaller country. That can be a very practical strategy if you're looking to have children. And this can have some other advantages from a more practical perspective. A lot of men, say things like they're sick and tired of Western women. They want to have a more traditional woman. Oftentimes other regions like Eastern Europe can help you find those types of things. Again, I want to focus more on the financial aspect of having a family here. But a lot of men think in these terms. They go, okay, if you want to have children, maybe move to a country where you can find more affordable childcare expenses and find a local wife there, and you marry her, get a passport, and then raise a family there. That can be a great strategy. But if you want to stay in the United States, you have to be practical. So a man being a few years older, woman being a few years younger is a better way to do it. And of course, when it comes to affording it, on your own, housing is the number one thing. You got to find a way to make housing affordable. Of course, everything else, it definitely helps. Saving money on cars, saving money on health insurance, saving money here and there definitely does help a lot. But ultimately, if you want to stay in the U.S., housing is your number one concern when it comes to raising children. And so, with that said, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, drop it below in the comment section. I'd love to answer it. Otherwise, thank you for watching and have a great day.